We've got something very, very special to talk about today, the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. Let's dive in. Hello, I'm Dr. Sam, this is Dr. Sam's Health, and today we are going to talk about the Minnesota Starvation Experiment. That was a monumental study that was conducted closer to the end of World War II by Ansel Keys, quite famous researcher, and I must confess that I've been procrastinating a lot. I have spent pretty much whole months of January bouncing between couple of video ideas, and I'll explain why. So first of all, I really wanted to make a video about body fat utilization mobilization limits, and there is a great study on that utilizes the data from a very old study that was conducted in 1944, 1945 by Ansel Keys, very famous researcher, and I was not sure how to approach it and where to start. So I made the executive decision to actually do a little bit of research into the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, this original study, and the next video will be about the study that is based on the data that were obtained in the original study. So today we're going to talk about the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, really a monumental study that determined in a way certain branches of science like physiology, nutrition, starvation experiments, and rehabilitation. Actually, some conclusions made in this study, they apply to modern rehabilitation techniques that are used in people with eating disorders. Before I continue, obviously I have to make my regular disclaimers, which are I'm a licensed physician, but I do not provide any kind of medical advice over YouTube or on my website, drsamshealth.com. Check it out, by the way. I express only my opinions that do not necessarily represent the opinions of my governing bodies, my discipline, psychiatry, my colleges, universities, and my colleagues. I'm just providing some educational videos, sometimes entertainment videos, and I just share my opinions that, again, are solely mine. So, without further ado, let's dive into the monumental study of Ansel Keys. I bet that some of you have heard about Ansel Keys. He was actually a quite prominent researcher, famous, I would say, who had conducted quite a few experiments. He is known for designing military rations, or MRE, packages that were called K rations. There is even a theory or idea that they are named after him, K as Keys. He was also the main author and main investigator of the 7 countries study, which likely we'll talk about at some point in the life of my channel. But also he had conducted this Minnesota Starvation Experiment, which was actually very timely and very necessary study to conduct. Ironically, I don't think that people would be able to conduct this kind of study these days, just because of the ethical considerations, and you'll see why. The idea was that during World War II, there were quite a few areas of the world where people were starving, essentially, and we needed to know how to help them to rehabilitate. So in order to see what happens to the human body when people starve, they have conducted the experiment that included 36 people. They actually used the data on 32. And they have taken these people, and the idea was to starve them, to lose decent amount of body weight, and then to try to help them recover. Accordingly, the study had 4 phases or stages. Phase 1 lasted 3 months or 12 weeks. It was called the stabilization or control phase. The idea was to give people decent amount of nutrients. Their diet comprised of 3,200 calories, which is actually a pretty good amount. And the idea was just to establish the baseline function and level for these people, and also they could calibrate their research arsenal, their tools that they used. So after that, they have taken these 36 people who were actually in the perfect health. At that point, they were selected to be in perfect physical health, mental health. They were quite intelligent people. There are some data indicating that they were 2 standard deviations above a standard recruit, and these people were conscientious objectors. So these people were subjected then in phase 2 to starvation. They actually changed it to semi-starvation, and you can see why. So these people were allowed to consume approximately 1600 kilocalories per day, half of their caloric intake from previous stage. Uh, to be precise, I think that the average number is 1560 or 70 kilocalories per day. They would consume breakfast and lunch. So in a way, it looks like their diet was at times resembling intermittent fasting, which is actually fascinating. The second important thing that we have to know about their starvation phase is that the diet was supposed to mimic the nutritional patterns of people who were in famine uh, affected areas of the world. So they consumed very basic food staples, essentially, like tubers, macaroni and cheese in limited amounts, some bread. There were some beans there, a very minimal amount of meat, and that is one of my major critiques or concerns. But I see why they have done it this way, and I haven't seen any kind of indication that they were supplementing them with micronutrients. After 24 weeks of this semi-starvation, these people have moved to the rehabilitation phase. And during this rehabilitation phase, they were subdivided into several groups. And depending on the group, they were receiving additional amount of calories, some protein supplementation, some micronutrient supplementation, which actually makes me think that during the semi-starvation phase, this supplementation did not happen. And they have added somewhere between 400 calories to 1600 calories to their previously established very low level of caloric intake. So in total, people in different groups received somewhere between 2000 and 3200 calories per day for the following 12 weeks. And then there was a unrestricted rehabilitation phase when people could eat as much as they wanted, and they actually ate a lot. Some uh, data indicate that people were consuming up to 11,000 calories a day, which is a huge amount of calories, right? So what did this study result in, and what were the conclusions? The main results were that people who entered the study with the average height of 5 feet 10 inches and average weight of 152 pounds, which is, it puts them in some sort of a thin category, actually. These people have lost approximately 25% of their body weight. And that weight loss actually resulted in terrible, devastating impact on their physical and mental health. Just before we proceed with talking about that, I would like to note that around 1600 kilocalories per day doesn't sound like a very strict diet, at least to me. And we have seen people in clinical setting who consume way less. We have seen clinics that run low calorie diets, very low calorie diets that comprise of like 800 kilocalories per day. And these people do not seem to have this kind of drastic responses to caloric restriction as the participant in the study had. And this drastic response was they have lost 25% of their body weight. Their basal metabolic rate has dropped by 40-50%, so it essentially was split in half. They suffered from all kind of physical weakness, decrease in immune system function, reduced heart rate and blood pressure, reduced respiratory rate, loss of libido. They all were males. They were, most importantly, they were very preoccupied with food. They felt depressed, anxious, tired, fatigued. Their cognitive function has dropped, and anything they could think about was actually food. They could only think about food. They played with food when they were offered it. They rearranged food in their plate. They savored every little bit. Some of them started doing something they called souping, when they would take some small portion of whatever they had and would dilute it with water. They became preoccupied with food temperature, and also actually one of the signs of like physical deterioration that was observed was the difficulties with regulating body temperature and feeling cold all the time. Uh, all these things, they actually look pretty much like clinical presentation of anorexia nervosa, at least like physical aspects of it. And uh, a lot of clinicians actually use this Minnesota Starvation Experiment as a good psychoeducational tool when they're working with patients with anorexia. Personally, I believe that these conditions, like externally imposed dietary restriction versus anorexia nervosa, are very, very different. But the physical impact of caloric restriction, they are nearly identical. And that is something we have to remember or keep in mind. But this video is not about that. Uh, in the later phases, they just try different protocols of rehabilitation, different amount of calories, protein supplementation, and micronutrient supplementation. And essentially, one of the main conclusions was that in order to rehabilitate, people would need to consume somewhere along 4,000 kilocalories per day. And that is pretty much everything that we can say about the study. Obviously, there's much more. There's actually like 2-volume book that was written by Ansel Keys. I ordered it. I've got first volume so far, and quite frankly, I don't feel like reading it just because it has a lot of information, but also it's like very diluted with lots of anecdotes and so on. Maybe in some spare time I will do some reading on this topic, but in general, I'm not planning to. So what I wanted to say about this study, my own conclusions and my critique in a way. First of all, don't do it at home. This is the most ridiculous weight loss protocol, and we can see how much of a terrible impact it had on the physical and mental health of the participants. I believe that weight loss should never be starvation. There should not be any suffering. I don't like the word starvation, to be honest, just because it kind of implies suffering. But most importantly, the study was designed in such a way that people would suffer. It was designed in such a way that it would replicate the areas where there was famine, there was not enough food, and they pretty much gave some very staple kind of foods to these study participants. And if we were to design a weight loss trial, we would likely not use this kind of protocol. My major concerns are first with decrease in metabolic rate, which was essentially like split in half. These people lost 25% of their body weight. At the same time, they have lost 40% of their muscle mass, which is terrible. And that, I think, explains the drastic reduction in basal metabolic rate. I also think that losing 25% of your body mass over the course of 6 months or 24 weeks is not a huge achievement per se, if you think about it, especially given the quality of this weight loss. So I think the number that is posted is 37.5 pounds of body weight that was lost. They were lost during this 24-week time period at the expense of tremendous impact on their physical and mental health is unacceptable. And I actually can give you multiple examples of people losing much more weight in much healthier way without these repercussions. Actually, I can use myself as an example. You have likely seen, or you can check my YouTube channel. There are at least 2-3 videos when I lose 45 pounds over the course of 3 months, and I don't suffer from any of that. Yeah, I would be hungry, maybe a little bit irritable, maybe a little bit tired here and there, but overall I would effectively lose 45 pounds, which is more than that, without major impact on my testosterone levels, changes in libido, mood, insomnia, and so on and so on and so on. So I believe that the major drawback of this study, which was almost intentionally placed there, is the lack of protein and micronutrients in their diet. These participants were consuming mostly tubers, some macaroni and cheese, small amounts, some bread, a little bit of beans, and the amount of meat was limited. So I am pretty sure that they lack protein, dietary protein, and that led to significant loss of muscle mass, and coupled with the lack of micronutrients led to all this drastic deterioration of their physical and mental health. And accordingly, I would again say never ever do anything of this sort at home. Please, if you want to lose weight, use a rational approach. We've got good guide for that. Make sure that you establish a reasonable, very reasonable caloric deficit parameters. You calculate your goal, you calculate your total daily energy expenditure, your basal metabolic rate, you design a nutritional plan that has protein, that fits your macros essentially and has all the micronutrients you need, and lose weight effectively. And over the course of relatively short period of time, we're talking about several months, you can actually effectively lose a lot of body weight, and the vast majority of this body weight will be body fat rather than losing lean body mass or muscle. So these would be my take-home points. And again, I don't believe that weight loss should be a starvation or should involve any kind of suffering. Yes, there will be a little bit of emotional changes, a little bit of like temperature fluctuation intolerance. Yes, there'll be a little bit of hunger, but it doesn't have to take the form of actual starvation when people are literally losing their mind. There are people who are chopping off their fingers during this experiment, people who were having experiencing some psychotic symptoms, they were thinking, they had like cannibalistic dreams and so on and so on and so on. That study has a profound effect on them. I don't want anybody experiencing anything of that sort. And that's, once again, I believe that the approach to dieting should be rational. You have to make sure you consume enough protein, you make sure you consume enough micronutrients, you pace yourself properly, and achieve very good, wholesome weight loss and enjoy it. That was it. In my next video, I will talk about another study that was using the data from this study, and this study I'm going to talk about is going to focus on possible potential limit of the body fat mobilization during weight loss. I'm glad that today I was able to actually talk about the Minnesota Starvation Experiment, because you can see right now how many drawbacks this diet essentially had, and accordingly it will translate into some critiques of the second study I'm going to talk about. Sorry for being so cryptic or convoluted and perplexed here, but in the next video I'll explain exactly what I'm going to talk about. So if you like this kind of content, please let me know. Hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, follow me here, or check out my website, Dr. Sam's Health. Of course, if you want to lose weight, use the rational diet. It's a great approach. Actually, the more I talk about this book, the more I review it, the more proud I feel about myself, because it is actually a very good, undiluted guide for weight loss. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. All the very best.